Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We're here with Jim Kraus from buyerpersona.com. And Jim is the president of the Buyer Persona Institute, and he's a leading authority on this idea of buyer personas and buying insights. He's the author of the Buyer Persona Buzz newsletter, and there's a second edition of the Buyer Personas book coming out. And so we're going to be talking about this whole idea of buyer persona insights and how to get some results through this research. So, Jim, glad to be talking to you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. And so, yeah, this whole idea of like the buyer persona or the avatar, like sometimes it drives me crazy when people teach it from one of two extremes, right? Either there's the kind of made up pie in the sky and someone says, oh, my avatar is Bob, and here's what I'd like to target. And then they kind of just make it up as they go along. And then I've also come across some of these people that they come up with like 12 different avatars, and they give me like these pages long reports of like, well, we think we want to target all these different things, and it seems more like useless, and it seems very like academic and ivory tower, and it seems like somewhere in the middle of all that is something useful. So can you tell us about this idea of the buyer persona, the avatar, and why it has it's something that you like to focus on?
Yeah, so our definition of buyer persona is maybe a little bit different than one that so maybe some listeners are accustomed to, right? So buyer persona, traditionally, a lot of people think about them as you mentioned, like an avatar of a fictional person that you're trying to influence around a particular buying decision. Typically, that will include things like, profiling demographics, age, education, maybe a little bit about what the top priorities of that particular role or individual are. And those are all fine, but the challenge with those is they don't really provide you any insights to help really affect marketing and sales decisions. And if you think about the role of marketing and sales professionals, fundamentally what their role is to educate and influence buyers around specific buying decisions. And what I just described, the profile of a role, doesn't give you any insights about the actual buying decisions that people make. So what you really want to think about, rethink the way you think about a buyer persona is it provides deep buying insights around a specific buying decision that you want to influence. So if you structure your buyer personas around that, and we can talk a little more detail about maybe what the key components are, but if you wrap your head around that for a minute, those type of insights really will inform just about every marketing and sales decision that you're going to make.
I love it. This is very helpful so far. And you're using this term buying decision a lot. And I like how you said that the marketing and sales is about educating them and then influencing them. And I think that's something that we all would like to tap into. Like if we've been prospecting with the sales, after a while, you kind of get a feel for who the promising leads are. And even when you have these conversations, you kind of get a feeling of like, if they say this, or if the conversation goes in this direction, they're pretty quickly disqualified. But then if they kind of mention these more like the buying questions they say, then they are more promising. And then on the marketing side of it, then the thing to tap into that's always exciting is to speak their language. And for that prospect to feel as if you're reading out of their diary and as if you understand their problems better than they do. And so those are all exciting things to achieve, and things especially if they can be kind of repeatable and like systematized and be more scientific instead of a vague abstract notion. And so you promise some of these key elements. So if someone is looking to get these better buyer insights, what's the jumping off point? How does someone even begin to tackle this?
Yeah, so a couple of key tenets of this. Number one is the best way to capture these insights is talking to recent buyers. There is no better way to do it. And I know a lot of, particularly marketers, sometimes are a little bit anxious about talking to recent buyers. Sales professionals may be a little less anxious because they do it on a day-to-day basis. But when I say recent buyer, what I mean, let's first just define what that is. Think about whatever product, service, or solution that you're selling, right? That you're marketing to whatever audience. A recent buyer is somebody who's made that exact buying decision in recent months, say the past 6 to 12 months, no more than that. These are not your current customers necessarily. These are folks that you would ideally want in your sales pipeline. You want to talk to them because A, they're representative of your market. B, if you talk to them, you're going to find out insights beyond just the deals that you're seeing, right? If you talk to your current customers, you're going to be learning a lot about what you already know. So you want to talk to recent buyers. The second thing you want to do is you want to have in-depth conversations with these buyers. And the approach that we use and advocate is usually about a 30 to 40-minute interview to have with these folks. And it's not a scripted, structured type of discussion where you're asking them to rate or rank things. The main objective there is to really understand their entire buying journey from the moment they had an initial need for your particular solution all the way until they made a final decision, right? So as an example, if you're somebody that markets CRM software, you want to know everything from what was the thing that initially got them to even start looking for a CRM solution, to how did they came up with what providers and solutions they were going to look at, how did they winnow down their choices, how did they ultimately make a final decision, et cetera. And then the last component of this, those are the first two components, recent buyers and interview them, is how you develop your buyer persona. So we have five, we call it the 5 rings of buying insight, which is just a name. But there's 5 key areas of insight that you want to cull when you look across the interviews that you do. The first one we call priority initiatives. And these are essentially triggers, right? These are the things that you learn from speaking to buyers are the reasons that they initially started looking for your particular solution. The second thing we call success factors, and these are the benefits, the outcomes. What are the results that they want from this investment? The third one is a really important one. We call it perceived barriers. And what that is it's all the fears, concerns, trepidations that buyers have about making this buying decision. And particularly for higher consideration buying decisions, these are often products and services that buyers may have never purchased before, or they don't do frequently. Could be for a pretty sizable investment amount. There could be both business and professional ramifications on this decision. So you can be assured that buyers are going to have concerns. And there's some great research that's recently been done showing how much a big part of customers not choosing anybody is just because of indecision. They're just fear of messing up, essentially. So those insights identify all those perceived barriers. Fourth thing is decision criteria. And this is all the questions that you can anticipate buyers asking when they're doing their valuation. And the way you find that out is in the buyer interviews. You literally you find out how they winnow down their choices. What are those key moments of truth, and what are those key questions that kept somebody on the list or DQ'd somebody from the list or got somebody selected. And then the fifth and final part of your buyer persona is your buyer's journey. And this is steps in the process. Who are the key decision influencers? What are some of the key information sources they trusted? So you can really paint a picture. And if you have these 5 things, now, unlike a fictional avatar, now you've got 5 things that will directly inform your marketing and sales campaigns. It'll inform your content strategy. It'll inform your messaging. The other important thing to think about it is it's not just top of the funnel stuff, right? You're not just trying to figure out how do I even get in the consideration set. When you get to things like perceived barriers and decision criteria, now you're talking about how do you really start converting some of that business in a more effective way, and where are your opportunities to really differentiate yourself?
I love it. This is amazing advice. And whenever anyone gives advice like this on a podcast, what I think is it can apply to like a business of any size, right? You kind of abstract it. And so when I'm sure like you have your ideal target, but I also think of it as far as like in my business, I'm like, oh yeah, we always see these reminders, right? And so kind of the thing I just keep on seeing these last few weeks is this idea you're talking about interview your recent buyers just to kind of get some of this data. And that way you can get the success stories, but then you can also kind of get these key insights and get the keywords and the phrases and the emotional triggers. So that way you can kind of develop the lookalike audience and just get more of these people through the funnel. But then also when you do get these people through the funnel, then you replicate the journey that they went on it. As you said, what got their attention and what caused them to whittle it down, and where were the bottlenecks, and maybe the bottlenecks were indecisions, and what made them drop off, what made them stay on, and what triggered them finally to buy, and then what sorts of results did they have. And then that way we have all this ammunition, right? That way we have all these things to use for like the follow-ups, and if we want to make a webinar or like ads, then instead of guessing, we just have all this sort of data. And this is, like I said, it's just a thing that I just keep seeing as far as like the marketing advice, the YouTube content out there. I just keep seeing these reminders of meeting with your buyers, which a lot of people don't do, right? They say, I sold them, I've closed them, now it's time to do the work for them. And so when it comes time to do some of these meetings, these 30 to 40-minute calls that you're mentioning, like what's sort of the setup? Like if I went to a buyer and I said, well, hey, do you want to get on a call for 40 minutes? Like, it seems like I'm not sure everyone would agree to that, or maybe you would say like your best buyers would agree to that. But like, what's the pitch for them spending 30 or 40 minutes with you on a call like this?
Yeah, so the folks that you want to identify, again, these aren't your current customers necessarily. You may run into some of your current customers, but you want to make this as objective and unbiased as possible. So what you want to do is you want to work with, oftentimes we'll have folks that will work with recruiting partners. There are folks that do this every day. They find these folks. There's different types of firms that do this. You can also find people potentially LinkedIn or other sources. But when we do these interviews, we pay folks, right? So this is we go in it as a research study that we're doing with them. They are promised an honorarium, just as any marketing or sales professional, I'm sure, has participated in focus groups or in-depth interviews. It's of that ilk. The difference is that unlike a focus group, for example, where a lot of times you're asking people for their thoughts and opinions about certain topics going into the discussion, these interviews aren't anything like that. So the only scripted question that we ask at the beginning of these interviews is, take me back to the day when you first decided you needed X, and X would be whatever product or service you're focusing on, right? And they're talking about. And you say to them, what's the first thing that you did? When you literally, for the next 30 or 40 minutes, keep probing so you understand their full story. Our interviews are more like what a journalist would do, where there's no right or wrong answers. And there's no pontificating, right? The buyers aren't thinking, well, maybe I would do this, or maybe I think that. They're literally telling you what they did. And the thing that maybe can lower some anxiety about doing this kind of work is that buyers love talking about this stuff, right? A lot of times they get the question, how do you convince them? Well, we initially convince them because they get paid an honorarium for their time. A lot of times we can't get them off the phone. And the reason for that is because this was a really important decision for them. And it's nice. It's almost cathartic for a lot of them to talk about, how wrought they were trying to make this decision, the ups and the downs, and things that went on in the organization, and the different points of view that were expressed at different times in the organization. And they help you understand all those things. It's literally, the best way I can describe it is, it's like almost being in the back room during the entire buying decision. Again, condensed, right? If it's a 9-month buying decision, for example, condensed, but identifying what are all the kind of key moments in that. So it's a little bit of a different kind of an interview, but if you have a natural curiosity, you're open to probing, and we can talk later. I can point you to some resources later that can help you kind of think about how to structure the interviews. But you'd be surprised how much you can learn from them doing it that way.
Amazing. And as you said, I'm sure it's cathartic and makes them feel good because they're talking about themselves and they're solidifying their past decisions, because we've all done things where we say, I wonder if things had gone differently. But if you're recapping and retelling your story, then it kind of makes them feel more confident about what they did, especially when they can kind of look at it back at it with that 2020 hindsight. And so I imagine that when you do a lot of these sorts of interviews, sure, you get lots of the sparks and ideas, but I'm sure that you get a lot of the repeat recurring patterns. Like you get those, like the same answers again and again. And you say like, oh my gosh, like this is so important because everyone says that this is what made them decide, or this is the phrase they always use.
Mm-hmm. It depends. I mean, we find commonalities. I mean, we've done persona studies for probably north of 200 companies. And we do a lot in the tech industry, for example. Really, any kind of buying decision that's more high consideration, whether it's a B2B or B2C type decision, this methodology works really well. And you do find some commonalities in some of the things that you hear, but you also hear a lot of unique differences. I mean, one of the favorite parts of what we do on a day-to-day basis when we do help companies develop buyer personas is when we do a readout of the finding with our clients. And the reason for that is almost always there will be certain findings or certain insights where our clients will be nodding their head saying, oh yeah, that's confirmational. We thought that. We already have some things going on with that. And there'll always be some unique new things that they hadn't heard of, or maybe they hadn't been paying as much attention to. And I would argue both are very valuable. So it's amazing to me, even when somebody says something's confirming, it's still super useful because it just gives them conviction about, hey, we're prioritizing the things the right way. I'm glad we're doing this. We have this asset under development, right? And it's really well aligned. Or if it's something new, right, where they haven't really been paying attention to that has obvious value. One other point I'll make here while we're on the topic, so I don't forget, is one of the key parts of your buyer persona, besides looking across the interviews you do for patterns in the data to come up with the insights, right? Because that's kind of what you're looking for, where you're seeing commonalities in the interviews. The other thing you absolutely have to include is buyer quotes. And these are invaluable because they do two things. One is they add instant credibility to your findings, right? So let's say you're in the marketing department and you're sponsoring this buyer persona study, instantly you will have credibility that this is the voice of the market, because it's not you espousing your point of view. Your buyers literally rip off the page. You can tell very quickly that these are the folks that you're targeting, right? So the sales, the product teams, senior management all feels really good that, hey, this is it, right? The other major benefit, which you had alluded to earlier, was when it comes to things like, thought leadership, messaging, any kind of communicating, it just adds that richness and that nuance and that depth that you can't get from a, one sentence buying insight, right? It adds you really get to see how they think, how they talk about this kind of stuff, right? And that's just invaluable when you're developing strategy as well as communication mechanisms.
And I imagine that these thought leadership sort of quotes and language, the best ones happen when their guards are let down, right? Like if you put someone on the spot and say, can you say this in 2 sentences, give me a testimonial right now, then it'll be something clumsy and awkward. But just like how, you and me are on a podcast right now, and sometimes 15, 20 minutes in, some sentence just comes out and it's just, you're not even expecting it, and then that becomes a thing that becomes like on the reels or the quotes, just because it's something that naturally developed out of the conversation. So I imagine that by having these conversations, I don't know if like wearing them down or them getting their guard down is a proper phrase to use, but it's just once they're more relaxed and they're kind of in the conversation, and they might even forget that it's being recorded or forget what it's for, and they're just in the moment. That must be when some of the best material comes out.
Yeah, no question about it. Like I said, they enjoy having these conversations because it's something that meant a great deal to them. And it's not something they have to work really hard at, right? It's like, think about it as if somebody asked you about, you had recently gone to a restaurant, and they ask you, what'd you think of it? You like to share that information, right? Because you went there, you have an opinion about it. You don't have to think very hard about it. You remember everything that you kind of disliked about it, and you feel good sharing something that is of interest to somebody and has value. And trust me, when you're doing these interviews, you're going to be hanging on every word, right? Because this is literally your target market. These are the folks that you want to be selling to. And that will become very obvious that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say. So, they're great. Besides just doing the insights, the nice thing about doing the interviews is you start you start to get smarter, right? You start to get those insights right away before we even have a quote unquote final report, if you will, or a persona. You start just getting that sixth sense about, okay, this is who they are. This is how they think. I'm starting to really internalize who this is, and think how important that is to marketing and sales.
It is. And especially because, like we said throughout this conversation, that there's like the superficial approach of just like, figuring out the age and income range. But then there's your approach here of having the conversations and just connecting with people and tapping into their stories. And so speaking of stories, it's always fun on a podcast to talk about the case studies, the success stories. So does a fun, interesting story come to mind as far as your process, a client you work with, just what you do? Anything come to mind there?
I wouldn't say it's one per se. I would say it's always great for us to see all the different ways that our clients use buyer personas, or people that do buyer persona studies themselves, which you of course can do, and the ways that they use it. We've seen, from a hard metric standpoint, we've seen companies that use the approach and literally align all their marketing and sales strategies really tightly to what buyers want and need and expect in the buying experience, because that's what the buyer persona is telling you. It's telling you what they want to experience in their buying journey to have confidence in you. We've seen the two things I always love to see is an increase in qualified leads. because that means that you're just doing a better job connecting with buyers that are just starting to kind of look, right? That's just, a lot of this research is done without them ever really contacting sales directly, right? So you start to see more qualified leads. That's a great indication that some of the things that you're doing, some adjustments you're making to your marketing and sales approaches are working. The other thing that we love to see, and we've seen clients triple, quadruple their conversions by using buyer persona insights, because once you get to things like really uncovering their fears and their concerns and trepidations about this buying decision, once you get into what is the actual decision criteria that they use for this specific buying decision, now you've really got something, right? Like once you've got them in this funnel and they're looking at other providers, this is your chance to really differentiate yourself, because now they'll feel like, wow, this company just really gets me, right? They seem to know all the questions I'm going to ask. They seem to be talking to me in the right way. They seem to be alleviating my fears. And more than anything, they make me feel like, you know what, if I go with them, this isn't going to get screwed up, right? Like, I have confidence that this is going to work. And that's the feeling that they have to have. So we've seen a lot of increase in qualified leads, a lot of increase in conversion rates. We've had, Anna, I was on a client yesterday who was talking about how their competitor was across the hall at a conference. And, they had this new tagline and messaging that they had all lined up from the persona work that they did. And they just were able to distinguish themselves so much better from their competitors, so much better than they had been able to do. And it was almost, you could just feel the increased confidence they had, that they had really stuck the landing, right? That they had really nailed what their buyers want.
This is amazing. This is the magic that we're all looking for. And we all have competitors like that where we're saying, well, how do I outdo them? Do I do more, or how do I avoid competing with them? And it seems like by doing some of this research, then you mentioned this about fears, frustrations, and concerns. So this way you can make your prospects, your buyers, feel as if you get them, whereas everyone else is talking about bullet points and features and benefits. You're tapping into the emotions and the objections and the reassurance that the follow through will be good after they make that buying decision. And now this way you stand out, and we all strive to have that. It's really easy to be jealous about, like, say, like Apple or Harley Davidson. Like the brand itself has a persona, and you think like their people, that group has their own sort of personality, and that's something magic and special, and something that we all want to tap into, which we can get to by pursuing this buyer persona concept that you're talking about. And so you promised earlier that you had some resources. So if this is an idea that someone wants to pursue in their business, what sort of resources should they pursue? How do they pursue you? And how do they know if they're a right fit to contact you?
So buyerpersona.com is our website. It's the Buyer Persona Institute, and there are a number of resources we have available there that folks that would like to do a study like this themselves can tap into. We have buyer persona templates. We have a master class available. It's an online self-paced class you can take. There's also the book Buyer Personas. Adele Rivella who was founded Buyer Persona Institute 14 years ago, was the original author. We're also updating. We're having a newish edition of that book that's coming out next year, which her and I are co-authoring. So be on the lookout for that. But that website is a great resource, and we put a lot of thought leadership materials out there too. And if you're in a position now where you're either not doing buyer personas, or you're doing them and they're really just profiling individuals or decision makers, and they're not really providing a lot of value for you, go take a look and do some reading on it. This approach can really be a game changer for you. And one other resource, feel free to link into me, Jim Kraus. I do put out a newsletter. We call it Buyer Persona Buzz, where we also put material out there. And we try to put out things that are very either pragmatic how-to type stuff, or just here's some additional ways to think about some things, so that you're not wasting your resources, or you're making the most effective use of your time and efforts.
I love it. Buyerpersona.com is that place to go. And I even love how subliminally you're making a good use of your own proprietary technology. This term buyer persona, you immediately understand what it means. But then also when we were mentioning it, you differentiate it from some of the other similar things like the customer avatar. And you say, well, this is this is kind of in the same ballpark, but this is different. This is unique. This is special. This is the solution that works when others don't. This is the buyer persona. And we made sure to mention the phrase so that way it's kind of the thing that you're known for. So you practice what you preach. Buyerpersona.com is the place to go. And as we wrap up our conversation here, Jim, I always find it fun to be a little introspective at the very end of the conversation and ask my guest what advice they wish they'd gotten 20 years ago. So does anything come to mind thinking back 20 years ago? What advice would have really helped you back then?
You know, it's funny. I'm a market research professional by trade. So I would say the one piece of advice would be really try to understand and appreciate. If you're in the, let's say if you're in a marketing profession, you're listening to this, really try to appreciate and understand the different roles that are in the organization that touch marketing and sales. I will say, you know, having a deeper understanding of the marketing profession over the last many years now, combined with my market research experience, has been invaluable, because you kind of see how they both really could fit together. And if you don't have that understanding, you just miss certain opportunities to really make a difference and actually to enjoy your work more and make it more impactful. So that would be, if I had to give one piece of advice, I think that would be the big one. You know, make sure you really understand the job and the frustrations and the challenges that other people you work with a lot that are all in the same mission or trying to get done. That's invaluable insights to have.
Empathy, what a concept. And
Right.
And it's so helpful in a lot of ways, because I think, you know, you make me think about like when I was like a teenager or a young adult, I was very just focused on what I did. And I said, who cares about what anyone thinks or feels or what their frustrations are? But I think it's important to be naturally curious. And then that also takes a lot of the pressure off yourself, because if you yourself are nervous or doubtful, but then you're focusing on helping others, then it takes your own anxiety away from yourself, and you're being empathetic and understanding about what it is that they're going through, and it just makes you a better person overall in whatever context, right? If you're dealing with the customers or you're dealing with the coworkers on the team, just be more understanding about their position, about their problems, their struggles, their responsibilities. Very amazing and excellent advice, Jim. And so people should go right now to buyerpersona.com. That's BUYERPERSONA.com, buyerpersona.com. We will see you there. And thank you very much, Jim, for enlightening and amazing us and wowing us with this advice and these insights. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, George. I really enjoyed it.